Parla's wrist unit blinked red before she even heard the shot, a soft countdown, 10 seconds to elimination, ticking over jungle static thick enough to taste. Beside her, in the wet dark under the canopy, Thorn didn't move to help. He grinned through his breathing mask instead, which was somehow worse than the countdown. "Stay down," he clicked. "You're bait now." If there had been light enough, Parla's spots would have flared violet with panic. 4 months on this world, 4 months trying to think the way the humans thought, and she still hadn't managed it, that being marked dead could be a weapon instead of an ending. She would understand it fully in about 6 hours, when Commander Vex slammed a stylus onto a debrief table and called Maya Okonkwo the most unsettling cadet the Academy had produced in 3,000 years. But that came later. This story, if it has a beginning at all, started with a lecture hall and 200 species trying very hard not to stare at one empty chair. Parla remembered orientation only in pieces, Professor Velnix pacing beneath a star chart, a cluster of worlds glowing red that he called death-rated, and then a word that dropped the whole hall into 100 different registers of silence. Earth. He'd shown them an image of something soft-skinned and clawless, built like it should have died out its first winter, and told them it hadn't. Then a small human cadet rose out of the crowd, and 200 students flinched sideways in unison, because none of them had noticed her sitting there. That was Parla's first sight of Maya. It was not her most important one. The important one came minutes later, when Velnix described a siege he'd once assigned. 50 defenders, 200 attackers, 3 days to hold. Most cadets answered with ration schedules and rotating watches. Maya had asked whether the well upstream could be reached. "I told her yes," Velnix said, and something in his voice went careful. "She poisoned it. She salted full supply caches through the forest. She looped recordings of heavy weapons fire through the night, so the attackers never slept long enough to think straight." He let that sit. "I failed the assignment. Water contamination alone breaks 17 treaties on its own." He'd called her into his office afterward. He told them, and asked where a first-year cadet had learned tactics like that. Maya answered, standing in front of 200 strangers, and her voice never wavered. "Humans did these things to each other for thousands of years, Professor. We named whole centuries after how creatively we did them." She said it the way someone else might mention rain. "You asked where I learned it. I learned it being born." Nobody laughed. A cran near Parla forgot to breathe through his mask. Parla understood in that second that the galaxy's idea of a monster and the human's idea of an ordinary Tuesday were the exact same shape, and that she had no framework at all for what that meant. She built one anyway. 3 weeks later, hovering at Maya's cafeteria table with Rickson's scales flickering nervous green, Parla finally asked the question that had been eating at her since orientation. Was it true humans hurt each other on purpose, for practice? "Sparring," Maya said, like the word explained itself. "You want to feel a real hit before someone's actually trying to end you. Otherwise, the first time you get hurt is also the first time it counts for something." She looked at their faces and grinned in a way that made Rickson go a shade paler. "Training Base 7. Tonight. Bring medical forms if it makes you feel better." What followed over the next month was less a lesson than a slow dismantling of everything Parla thought combat meant. Maya let them swing at her for an hour at a time and never once looked hurried. "You're all thinking too much," she told them. "I've already moved by the time you finish deciding." She taught them that a block could double as a strike, that hesitation killed faster than a wrong technique ever would, and that failing inside a drill wasn't a wound, it was data. By the third week, 30 cadets were crowding into a bay built for 4, and Velnix watched from the observation deck with an expression Parla couldn't quite place. He didn't shut it down. Instead, he handed Maya a scenario, mentioned that Commander Vex hadn't lost one in 40 years, and asked if she wanted to try anyway. Which brought Parla back to the wet, dark jungle, 10 seconds from elimination, with a grinning teammate crouched beside her, and a plan she still didn't fully trust. Maya's briefing had sounded like madness on paper. Split 15 soldiers into 5 cells of 3, make noise, get seen, let themselves get hit. Acceptable losses, she'd called it, and half the room had recoiled from the phrase like it was an open flame. Vex, watching from the control deck, read it as amateur recklessness, right up until his forces, chasing the loud, obvious bait, found their perimeter empty of anyone to defend it, and two of Maya's 3 objectives, already flagged, secured behind them. By the 4th hour, eliminated cadets like Parla were still moving, quietly, unofficially, cutting comm lines and spooking patrols, because the scenario's rules had never actually said the dead had to lie still. Vex swore in 3 languages when he found the gap. Velnix, beside him, only smiled. Maya's squad won on objectives, with 60% of them marked dead by the scenario's own count. That number was what brought everyone into the debrief room already braced, and it was there, not in the jungle, not in the corridor after, that the real reckoning happened. Vex stood across the table from Maya and didn't sit down either, which every cadet in the room understood as its own kind of statement. "You spent your people," he said, "like they cost nothing." The room went still enough to hear the ventilation cycle. Parla watched Maya's hands, loose at her sides, not fists, not defensive, just steady, and understood before a word was spoken that this was the moment the whole exercise had actually been building toward. "They weren't spent, Commander." Maya held his eyes. "Every one of them bought me something back. A distraction bought me a flank bought me an objective. You can call that cost if you want. I call it currency. That's a cold way to lead people. It's an honest way." Something shifted in her voice, not colder, but harder, like a door closing somewhere behind her words. "I told every soldier in that jungle exactly what their death would buy before it happened. Nobody in my squad was spent without knowing the price. That's not coldness, Commander. That's the only kind of trust that survives contact." Vex studied her for a long moment, long enough that the room's silence started to feel like its own kind of sound. "You don't fight like anything we've trained here." "No, sir, I fight like where I'm from." She didn't blink. "That's not a flaw you can train out of me. It's the only reason I won." Nobody in the room laughed, or clicked, or shifted their weight for a full 5 seconds. Parla realized she was holding whatever passed for her breath. Vex broke first, not with anger, but with something closer to reluctant respect settling into the lines of his face. He offered her the transfer right there. The Advanced Warfare Program, 70% washout, built for the sharpest minds across every species wearing a uniform. Maya didn't hesitate long enough to make it look like a decision at all. "I'd like to bring some of my squad," she said. "They've learned to think the way I do. That might matter more than being born the way I was." Parla found out she'd been named 20 minutes later, standing in the corridor with Rickson's scales gone electric blue and Thorn clicking too fast for his translator to keep pace. "She volunteered us for the suicide program," Rickson said. "Advanced program," Parla corrected, and heard, with some surprise, how much of Maya's certainty had settled into her own voice without her noticing it arrive. "She still has the countdown light from that first jungle run, the little wrist unit that told her she was dead and let her keep fighting anyway. It stopped working somewhere in the 2nd month of the advanced program, its charge long gone, its red glow permanently dark. She keeps it on the corner of her desk regardless, in the east wing that used to be Maya's unauthorized training bay and is now, by order of the academy itself, required. New cadets from a dozen worlds pass it every morning on their way in, most of them not yet understanding what a dead light can teach a living soldier, that the countdown ending was never the same thing as being finished.